January, as you know, is School Director Recognition Month in Pennsylvania. That affords me a few minutes at tonight's meeting to shine a spotlight on the valuable contributions of our school board members who volunteer their time, expertise, and leadership to serve all the residents of Lower Merion and Narberth, especially our children. In Lower Merion, we're fortunate to have school directors whose passionate commitment to quality public education into this community is unsurpassed. By devoting countless hours each month to school business, they ensure the children of Lower Merion and Narberth receive the finest public education possible. The men and women seated in the front of this room take the time to understand the issues, opportunities, and challenges that we face in a district, and they're experts in their roles. The time they spend on district business is time they could devote to their families or other professional obligations. Instead, the sacrifices they make and the leadership they provide help our community remain a desirable destination for people of all ages who want a high quality of life. Joining us for tonight's recognition is Ms. Hayes, our local Member Services Manager from PSBA. On behalf of the entire Lower Merion School District community, we would like to recognize each of our directors and thank you for all you do. Yours is a difficult and often thankless job. It's important you know that we are deeply grateful for all that you do. Ms. Hayes, if you'd like to be so kind and to help distribute this year's certificates. Unfortunately, Mrs. Pollard is unable to be here tonight. So,
if I could just say just a few words. It is my distinct honor to be here with you this evening as your Member Services Manager. I visit districts all the time, but it's always an honor to actually come out and recognize you, especially during School Director Recognition Month. And thank you for your dedication and service to the students in your community. So tonight, I'm going to present these really quickly, and I'll pass them around. These certificates to you in recognition of School Director Recognition Month. Thank you again for your service.
Thank you for
Lynch.
Thank you.
They're in order. I thought they were. Mr. Driscoll.
Come over here.
You can take your time.
Yeah,
Great, thank you very much.
thank you so much. Thanks for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you again for your service. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
yes, some children from, what was it, Kenwood?
Yes.
Kenwood.
These are wonderful.
Yes.
These are hysterical.
The phonetic spelling is wonderful.
Okay, so we did things a little differently tonight, but we're going to start now with the pledge. So if everyone can please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the January 14th, 2019 Education Committee and Supplementary Regular Board Meeting. This is our first board meeting, first Monday evening board meeting of the new year. So hope everyone had a really good winter break and everyone's raring to go. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. We do have an action item on the agenda tonight, and I'd like to deviate a little bit from the agenda. As the board and public are aware, we've been doing our due diligence on several pieces of property, that being mostly on 912 Spring Mill Road. We have indicated, both in public and in the press, that as we were doing our due diligence, we found considerable amount of wetlands on the property. We wanted to make sure that we did everything we needed to do. We have completed that wetlands review, and it is the recommendation of the administration that given the extensive amount of wetlands on 912 Spring Mill, that we not that you not purchase that land, particularly in light of the fact that we have some alternatives that have also been discussed in the press, and we'll share more as time goes on. So that's the administration's recommendation. There is a resolution, and Mr. Roos is here to go through that for you.
Yes, the resolution, which is on the screen behind you, it's pretty straightforward, I believe. The agreement of sale has a due diligence period that ends on this January 19th, which means you have until then, actually January 18th, you have until then to terminate the agreement without penalty. In other words, you'll get your deposits back, and you won't have any. It's basically you can walk away and as if that point as if the agreement didn't happen. So this is obviously that date is before your next board meeting, so that's why this is being put on the resolution for tonight and not waiting till next meeting. So it's basically just by approving this resolution, you authorize the superintendent to basically authorize us to go to the attorneys for the seller, cancel the agreement, and get your deposits back.
Okay, thank you. Because this is a action item and a new action item, I'd like to take public comment at this time on this item only. There'll be opportunity for public comment at the end of the meeting on any item, on any issue. But at this time, if anybody has anything to say specifically about this motion, this resolution, can you please come sign in with Ms. LaPera? No? Okay, seeing no public comment, then I will turn to the board to see if there are any questions or comments. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? The resolution passes. Thank you.
If you'll excuse me, thank you very much.
Sure you want to go? Okay, so this evening we have an update on state assessments, and so I'll turn it over to Dr. Everslag and Dr. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Copeland, Dr. Gilbert, members of the board, Solicitor Roos, I guess. It's a special shout out. This evening's presentation is a summary of two previous presentations that have been conducted at the Curriculum Committee of the board meeting. As in December, we had a first data presentation around district-wide growth and achievement data on our Keystone exams. And then at the January Curriculum Committee of the board, we discussed our PSSA growth and achievement data. This presentation is a summary of both of those. We have three topics that we'll discuss this evening. First is the updates from the Commonwealth. So there are a few updates that we have from the state around testing. The first was we were promised last year that testing would be shortened for this year, and we've received details about what that would look like. So for beginning of the 18-19 school year, the testing window for the PSSA is reduced from 3 weeks to 2 weeks. The testing window is also 1 week later in the school year than it has been. The reading test moved from 4 days to 3 days. Math testing moved from 3 days to 2 days. Science remained at 2 days. So our total testing days in 2018 in previous year was 9. Total testing days in 2019 is 7. So a small improvement in that area with less instructional time being taken towards testing. Additionally, this fall, Governor Wolf signed Senate Bill 1095 into law, and Senate Bill 1095 basically allowed greater leeway for the districts to determine some graduation eligibility for students on the Keystone exams. Many things did not change. Keystone exams will still be administered. They are required to be administered. Students are required to take them, and there is an expectation of proficiency. What has changed is, in addition to students fulfilling this requirement by earning proficiency or advanced on all three Keystones, there are other options. We do anticipate that the option, as it had been, to still be the most common option. The alternative pathway is the state will determine a composite score that has not yet been released of all three exams. So if a student just missed it in one exam but had a higher score in the other two, that composite score would fulfill the graduation requirement. And the third pathway really is a lot more complicated, and I don't think it's really worth going into at this point, but rest assured that school teams will consult with families if students were having challenges in attaining proficiency on the Keystone exams. There are a range of other state acceptable measures to fulfill those requirements. And we're frozen here. So another announcement from the Commonwealth is the introduction of the Future Ready PA Index. And the Future Ready PA Index replaces the school performance profile, which had been used as the public reporting system for schools. The index is school-specific, it is not district-specific. And it offers a dashboard approach to measuring schools and reporting publicly schools on their performance in the state assessments, both growth and achievement. And there are other measures such as on-track measures on the 3rd and 7th grade and college and career readiness indicators. The tool also allows the public to access this and disaggregate data by several different subgroups, including special education, economically disadvantaged, English learners, and the 7 federally recognized race and ethnicity groups. There's also an interesting element of this program allows you to compare up to 10 schools at one time, so 10 in the district or 10 across other districts. One aspect of the Future Ready Index is that it is aligned with ESSA, which is the Every Student Succeeds Act, and ESSA requires that participation rates for schools be at 95%. So with that guideline, if your participation rate is lower than 95%, students will fall within that difference between your actual students participating and 95% are recorded as non-proficient. So the data that's reported on the index may be different than other data that's reported. I'm going to give you a look at what that would look like for us here in Lower Merion. So in Lower Merion, about 9 out of our 10 eligible students to test in the PSSA participated in the exam in the spring of 2018. That is slightly more than last year, but it's clearly below the 95% participation benchmark that's established by ESSA. So what that looks like in our schools is, if you read this chart, much like you're reading a thermometer, with 100% being at the top and the expectation of 95%, our actual district average was 90%. So students that did not participate under that 5% were deemed automatically counted as not proficient. And that's on a school-by-school basis. And just give you one example of what that looked like. For English and language arts participation, you can see that all 8 of our PSSA schools fell under the 95% expected participation rate, and ranging from Bala Cynwyd at 87% to Penn Valley at 93.5%. So you can see that that is going to impact how proficiency is reported publicly. Another piece of information around participation and opt-outs. There have been assumptions that have been shared with us and circulated around the community about who is opting out and what students are actually not participating. And this is just a snapshot of ELA for our participation across grades 3 through 8. And you can see that our participation rate, there are subgroups throughout that have students that chose not to participate. Now, non-participation does not necessarily mean opt-out. It could be absence. It could be for whatever reason the student is eligible and didn't participate, but opt-out is one. And our opt-out rates are not higher in our GIEP population than our other subgroups, and that is one of the narratives that we've heard. So just wanted to, the data does not support that.
Can I just interject, Scott? I think that A couple of observations. One, certainly everything I've seen in this, my fourth year of the district, is that Lower Merion has never shied away from looking at data to support instructional growth. And when you do that, you're basically looking in the mirror and saying, is this what we want? If it's not, what are we going to do about it? And I think that's a strong commitment of the district. I also genuinely understand the opt-out movement. I genuinely understand that people have some strong reservations about commercialization. And also, I've got some strong reservations about politics using assessment results in political ways to score political points as opposed to instructional. For example, I have been extremely critical that we don't get all the data back, particularly in written, kids writing, so that we can make instructional gains. And the fact that they won't give us that information, I think, verges on some extraordinarily bad practice on the part of the state. Having said that, I think that it appears that the efforts to opt out and change the political whims are not working. In fact, they're doubling down and basically saying, now we're going to take a look at kids who opt out and consider them not proficient. So it makes it difficult for us to use the test in the way I think we really wanted to use them, as an instructional tool to improve our curriculum, to improve our instruction. And so I would just argue that whoever was going to hear the pleas have not heard them, and we've got to move on from that. Scott.
So our second topic this evening is around the publicly accessible data. And there are a lot of data on how our students performed on multiple sources online. I'm just going to talk about a few of those. So both PSSA and Keystone data is publicly accessible by clicking on these links. So these links will be live on the presentation if people want to go immediately to access this. This visual also is a reminder of who is actually sitting for the exam. So PSSA is offered for all students in grade 3 through 8. So you can see that's obviously a subset of our larger population. Keystone exams are one-time end-of-the-course exams at the end of Algebra 1, Biology, and Literature. So students could take them as early as 7th grade, in some cases 6th grade if they take algebra that early. And biology is mostly given in 9th grade, and then literature in the 10th grade. Students in 11th grade are students that weren't captured initially from testing or perhaps are retesting. If you were to click on either of these two links, it would take you to the education.pa.gov site, and this allows you to actually see data of how our students who actually participated in the exam did. So the proficiency rates here will look different than on the Future Ready Index, because in this site does not, there's no consequence to the district as far as how the data is reported. This is, however, a spreadsheet that requires a lot of manipulation, but it is a lot of data that's accessible. Second data source is the PVOS site. The PVOS measures growth for students who have a testing history. So testing history of students in grade 4 through the Keystones, growth scores will be accessible on this site. You can, again, click on that link, and that will take you to a site that looks like this. Clicking on the public access will allow the viewer to manipulate a lot of data, including a lot of visuals. It's much more interactive, scatter plots, and multiple reports that show how our students are growing. And remember, we have to think about growth as how they did in relationship to how they're statistically predicted to do, not growth in the sense of how much improvement a student may have had. And the final data source that's available public is the Future Ready PA Index that I was referencing earlier. And the index is a dashboard. It looks like this. There are a lot of filters to identify schools. It's not super intuitive, but once you get used to it, it becomes a little easier to manipulate the data. There are tips for site navigation that we encourage viewers to access. So most of our data that we'll be sharing today is large-scale data. It's how we're doing across the district. And we know that when you take any snapshot of data, you really have to look much more closely to really understand that. So when we have looked at our data, we've looked at not only these large snapshots, but we looked at the data much differently to dig deeper to really understand what we have. So as we move into the findings and responses, we're talking about data that's really broadly illustrating our findings. And I could talk generally about some of the specific findings on the local level, but they're not going to be necessarily reflected in the presentation. And just another reminder that the presentation is a summary of the 2 detailed presentations that are currently available for the public to view. So I'm going to start with the summary. This is the summary of what we found by looking at the data. I'll detail each of these as we go through. But on average, our student achievement continues to be high across all tested subjects. Our growth trends are not consistent across levels. We have some different growth trends by school at the elementary level. Our secondary students are on average exceeding projections on the Keystone exams, but at the middle school level, our PSSA growth has been a concern. Concerns continue to exist around district-wide subgroup performances, particularly the achievement of our African American students on the PSSA exam. The gap with our growth data is not as pronounced as the gap in our achievement in data, but closing the gap does require students to consistently exceed expectations of growth. So we'll talk a little bit about that. You can't close the gap if you just meet your growth expectations. You have to exceed expectations for growth. Our district data analysis does show information about curriculum and programming. And then we take that analysis at the building level that shows some trends that may be occurring strictly at the building level, but not necessarily aligned with broader data. And as you'll see, as we all know, our closing gaps is a priority for the district. We'll continue to dedicate resources and efforts to close our learning gaps through a range of ways, and I'll share some of those through the presentation. So how are we looking at data? When we look at big picture data, the conclusions that we draw are typically around trends, around what do we see across schools. This can help inform professional learning. It can also help identify specific curricular needs across the district. However, findings are much more actionable when they're addressed by smaller teams at the localized data. There's a lot more ownership when teachers, small groups of teachers, are working on data around their students. So for example, you may have we may have a trend of 4th grade data of what a specific skill that is an area of need across the district. That may result in PD, it may result in some curricular changes, but the 4th grade team of teachers, maybe 3 or 4 teachers at a school, focusing on a small number of students, and their data may show something a little bit different. That data could be really actionable, is important for teachers to act upon. That's why we've instituted learning plans, and learning plans are building-based plans that are really look at the local data within the context of the broader data. On those learning plans, there are 3 parts. The first part is individualized students that might need particular needs. It could be looking at what supports have been in place, what has been successful, understanding that student, and try to program specifically for that student. The second part of the learning plan is district-wide curricular needs that are identified by the curricular team. And the third are those actionable goals that I referenced earlier by teams of teachers at the local level that either may reinforce or sometimes debunk some broader data. So we're going to look at our data from the 3 different disciplines. When we look at our data in English and language arts, our key finding number 1 is that our overall performance is high. So you can see that if you look at our numbers here, this is our data for overall 3 through 8 proficiency on English and language arts. It still remains higher. This number is slightly lower than our performance on last year's cohort of students. However, the proficiency rate's high. However, despite the performance level being high, we do have some skills, such as text-dependent analysis, which suggests an area of improvement. So in most of our skills, as the test is broken down by standard and by skill, in most cases, our average far exceeds the state average. And we're much closer to the state average in text-dependent analysis. You can see how many points we earn on an average by grade, out of how many possible points, and the state average. And you can see certainly that not only is this an area that reflects on the test as being an area of need, but we would think it's a skill that students are going to need in high school and college and beyond. So how are we responding to this? Well, we've established TDA is text-dependent analysis. We've just established TDA working groups. They're comprised of teachers in grades 4 through 9, supervisors and specialists. They work together to talk about best practices around instruction, assessment, and ways of supporting students' text-dependent analysis skills, as well as lesson planning around how they can the text-dependent analysis skills can be taught. There is more of an instructional focus in grade 1 through 3 on strengthening writing skills through a lens of focus, content, organization, and style, with the idea that a stronger writing foundation will also improve not only writing skills as students grow older, but the skills of analysis around that. We have consultants working at both the elementary and middle level with teachers in the skills of evidence-based analysis, close reading, and developing text-dependent analysis prompts. And our learning plans have actions based on local trends in their building. Our second key finding around English and language arts is that our elementary participants exhibited growth that's commensurate with or better than statistically derived expectations. And if you look at these are graphs that are from PVOS, which represent growth. So just a couple points of information around these graphs. There are data trends that are located at the top of each grade. So under grade 4, you can see a color code for how the students as a whole did by grade and what the 3-year average is for grade 4. So you can see in grade 4, the group as a whole across the district was in green. Green means that there's evidence that the group met the growth standard. 3-year average is also green. That's good. You can see that also with grade 5. However, I'll point out a downside to this data, and that you can see that some of the areas that are in red, which is quintile 1 and 2. So these numbers represent the quintiles. 5 is your top quintile, so that's your top 20% of kids in the state. So you can see in grade 4, over half of our kids fall in the top 20th percentile of the state. In 5th grade, over half of our students fall in the top quintile, or the top 20% of the state. However, our bottom quintile, in this case our second to bottom quintile, were in red. And in order to close achievement gaps, you need to have your quintiles 1 and 2 exceeding growth. So what they say is 1s and 2s in the blues. So your 1s and 2s in the blues means that they're showing the growth that is necessary to close achievement gaps. And then the quintiles also have color codes, either blue, green, or red, and you can see the codes for that, similar growth, meeting, exceeding, or not meeting the growth standard by quintile. So while our elementary participants did show growth, our middle school numbers did not reflect that growth. And you can see, obviously, this is an area of concern for us, that we're in the red not only for the year, but for the 3-year average in all 3 grades in the middle school, including your quintile 1 and 2. The Keystone growth, which is taken at the end of 10th grade, shows a little bit different trend. You can see strong evidence of growth for the 2018, and the 3-year average also being showing exceeding growth. And here is a data that shows a different story, and is showing that yes, this is data that's closing gaps in a way that you would like with your lower, well, partially in a way that we like with our first and second quintile growing. You obviously don't want to close your gap by having your top students not grow. That's not how you want to close your gap. This is a response that we've talked about through our gifted program evaluation as a recommendation for differentiation and meeting the needs of higher end learners across that would meet certainly a PD focus that would answer some of these questions. As a response to this, this was our actually most alarming data that we had our strongest response, and superintendent has called for a task force to be formed to really examine the growth trend more specifically, looking at root causes and potential solutions of why we're not seeing growth at ELA at the middle school. Much like we had done in math a couple of years ago, that really started a lot of exploration. It has really spanned the last few years. We got some real answers and a lot more clarification that led to some programmatic recommendations based on that. So as we shift to math, we look at our first finding, which our data trends reaffirm our commitment to adopting an integrated math program at the secondary level. There is some interesting data here. You can see what may stand out with math is that the proficiency numbers are generally lower than they are in ELA. That's true for us. It's also true for the state. This proficiency, grade 3 through 8 of 75.2%, I wouldn't say that's where we want to be. That number does represent the third highest number in the state of Pennsylvania for a district, and it's only fractionally less than the two schools that are technically, in quote unquote, in front of us with higher achievement. As you can see by grade, there are differences by grade of how we do. The grades listed here, and the proficiency rate by grade is listed here. And you can see how our proficiency rates, while 75.2 across 3 through 8, it's not consistently in that range throughout, with 8th grade drop being concerning. But we also have some understanding as to why. This is compared to the state data. So our district data is at the top, our state data is right underneath, and you can see the state data at the 8th grade level is really, quite honestly, embarrassing at 31% for the state proficiency rate. But our number is not where we would want to be as well. One of the things that we determined in the audit, and other districts are feeling this as well, is 8th grade standards are taught much less frequently in the curriculum. So as you'll see when we look at our growth data, many of our 8th grade students are not taking 8th grade math, they're taking algebra or geometry. They're further removed from those standards. But nonetheless, those will be standards that we would expect students to learn, and the revisions to the curriculum sequencing will address that. When looking at growth of our students in math, you can see how our growth trends look 2018 and over 3 years. And again, more concerning at the middle school level than the elementary level, with the Keystone level actually being high with blue. And you look at the quintiles for each grade as well. So here's 7th grade math, even though overall it was actually green for 2018, 1s and 2s in the blues, that's good. That's what we want to see. We obviously don't want the quintile 5 to be in red. As a response to this, we've talked about this in this venue and others, about the reconfiguration of the course alignments around Math 6, Math 7, the new courses Math 7, 8, Math 8, and then the integrated math series, which will debut next year. As a side note, there's been a couple meetings about integrated math. The last couple of weeks, we had good attendance at those meetings from the community and strong positive response from those meetings, including 50 attendees last Friday night when the over-under was 10, I think. We're actually, in addition to the work around the alignments, we are continuing to train our teachers in inquiry teaching in math and taking on the Math Vision Project practices. We have a group of teachers actually being trained this week in that. Superintendent authorized the hiring of additional math specialists at the middle schools. Now, those positions have just recently started, so they haven't been in too long, but we certainly are looking to support students at the middle school level more significantly. As we transition to science and look at our science data, key science findings is a few things. Our proficiency rates for the 2018 cohort of grade 4 and grade 8 were slightly lower than the 2017 cohort. And you can see that the grade 4, this is breaking it out by grade 4 and grade 8. Interesting note here about science. in that you see the proficiency rate in fourth grade, 92.5%. That's a very high proficiency rate. 61% of students in the advanced range, which is certainly an area of celebration. It doesn't remain consistent as we go to 8th grade. But even with that high proficiency rate, this is a good example of why you have to look at proficiency in conjunction with growth, because those same 61% advanced students still collectively did not meet their growth standard for 2018. Now that was an aberration from what we've seen the last few years. The 3-year average has been blue, and the 4th grade PSSA has not been an area of concern for growth. This is our first year where we were. However, the achievement obviously was very high. 8th grade science as well did not meet the standard for growth. When we look at that in comparison to what the 9th grade science experience will be, which is biology, we have been consistently in the blue. This is steps to both close the achievement gap and continue high achievement, or growth and achievement on the Keystone Biology exam remains one of the highest in the state. So our key findings from science include the following responses. Much like our math program, which is we're looking to integrate math, we are considering looking at the integration of science. The several middle school programs have integrated science program, where you have earth science, earth and space, life science, physical science that are integrated throughout 3 years as opposed to taught year by year. And in that case, students are sometimes further removed from the curriculum when they're sitting for the the PSSA math. We don't think it's negatively impacting our Keystone scores, but it is an indication of something to be looked at further with science. So the final data that we're going to be looking at really spans multiple disciplines is our gap data. And that's the analysis of across all 3 disciplines, our gap differences. The data warrant continued focus and expanded efforts on this. What we've done is looked at our PSSA data, grades 3 through 8 for all students. Now on this chart you can see the N here, the total number of students tested, 3 through 8, and the overall proficiency at 86.5%. Compared to our subgroups, Black and African American proficiency and our Hispanic proficiency, which is obviously evidently lower than all students. And the state considers groups, the 3 subgroups, IEP students, English learners, and economically disadvantaged students, under one category of historically underperforming. So we have 852 students who sat for the exam that are historically underperforming. The state does expect the historically underperforming achievement to rise annually. So that number is expected to go up every year, and that growth expectation is reflected on the Future Ready Index. When we transition to math, you can see the differences between, again, all students, Black or African American students, and grades 3 through 8, and you can see the N on the left, Hispanic students, and then our historically underperforming students in math. Our gaps in math are more pronounced than they are in ELA, and that trend reflects from PSSAs through our Keystone data. When we look at our gaps at the high school level in Keystone, you're dealing with a much lower end. So if you look back at math, we're talking about 3,600 students. At the high school level, we're talking about ends that are of the junior class. So we're talking about 342 students at Harrington, 374 students at Lower Merion. And this is the disaggregation of the data by subgroup for the Keystone Literature exam. Again, not where we would want it, but it is. The literature exam actually is the example where our gap is closing, and our white gap between our white-black gap is closing at literature. Not as much in biology or math. Here's the results of our biology exam and proficiency rates by subgroup. And finally, our algebra exam. So the state reports the best score of the junior class by subgroup. Students that have tested, they may have tested once, they may have tested 3 times. So there are several district responses to our work around closing achievement gaps amongst our subgroup data. We are through the Achievement Imperative Task Force, we are engaged in a district-wide reflection and audit of our educational equity policies and practices. We have new avenues towards accelerated math that we've recently shared with opportunities for students to access higher level math at multiple points throughout their Lower Merion School District career. So there are several entry points to access higher level math. We are revising our screening procedures for gifted programming, working with national experts to focus on ensuring equity and identification of students for the Gifted Education Support Program. We are engaging in a great deal of staff professional learning through CARE, through the Achievement Imperative Task Force. We are working on training participants on implicit bias. We continue our cultural responsiveness through cultural proficiency action plans being constructed at the building level and working with national consultants on that. We have a keynote speaker coming in February to talk to our teachers and staff on educational equity. We're excited about that. Dr. Tyrone Hauer from UCLA is coming in. We have student-centered learning plans that we've talked about throughout the presentation, where we're really looking at doubling down on support for students that need extra support, including the one-to-one tutoring initiative, which is we've added additional funding to support even more students at the one-to-one tutoring initiative, and are going beyond the district to look for tutors. So we are acquiring more and more tutors on a daily basis. We've expanded staffing to support academic support programs, including adding specialists. And we also have a subcommittee of the Achievement Imperative Task Force focusing on diversifying staff and hiring practices in that as well. And we will hear next month an update on the program evaluation that's being done now on our academic support programs. We're looking at how are we supporting kids and what is being more effective than others at how we're supporting students in need. And as a final slide, this is a recap of the summary which I presented earlier. It talks about our achievement and growth trends, what our concerns were around subgroups, how we're using data together, and our priority to closing learning gaps. So this time I'll take any questions.
Thank you very much for the excellent presentation. This is really extremely helpful for us to be able to try and understand what all this data represents, which is ultimately what we're trying to do. And I know that the curriculum committee of the board spent 2 meetings reviewing all of this in detail. So anyway, I really appreciate the effort of you and your team. Are there questions? Dr. Van Lynch?
Thank you for the presentation. That was a very comprehensive look at some pretty in-depth meetings that we've had the last 2 curriculum meetings, particularly around data, which is critical for us doing better on behalf of our students in the district. I did have 2 questions, and again, applauding the curriculum team for really trying to give a broad but yet detailed discussion around this topic. So the first is, can you talk a little bit about, and maybe this is for Mr. Copeland as well, the accountability for building leadership around some of this data? So when, obviously, the curriculum team and superintendent look at this data and say, okay, here's some concerns for your particular building, what are some of the conversations and the accountability pieces that get discussed for our building leadership around our students performing better?
So the building principals get the materials, and Christina helps organize it. Dr. Paul helps organize it and supports them. The information doesn't come in all at once.
Okay.
In fact, the PVOS came in
Late October.
Okay. So you get some initial materials, I guess, during the end of the summer. And they begin to set up what are called building learning plans. Building learning plans are responses to the data. When the teachers get back, they look at that with them in depth. The principals have PLCs. The PLCs are often around data and data teams. The building principals have to prepare a superintendent's report 3 times a year. That's a compendium of information, including teacher. It's not just testing; it's teacher assessments, and so forth and so on. Observations. This year, we've changed it a little bit and included 2 different things. One, a specific students by name that the principals will be coming in the second time, which will be coming up, and we'll be going through sort of student by student and what progress monitoring has been done around those students. And the other part that we're taking a look at in depth as part of the strategic plan is homework. So we're looking at specific homework assignments to see how they, in fact, support the kids. Principals have been doing this for the last 3 years. The requirement this year is that they have a public meeting, and the building learning plans eventually go up on their websites so that there's a public response to the work that they're doing. Have I left anything out?
That was great. Thank you, Mr. Copeland. And the second question is, you talked about the Achievement Imperative Task Force and a lot of the fantastic work that's coming out of that group. Can you talk about the group itself, who the group is comprised of, parents, teachers, et cetera, and then get a little more granular in terms of some of the things that have come out of those discussions. So if you could share how frequently the group meets, the kinds of conversations that are being had, and what kinds of things are being taken from that group to identify that really comprehensive list that you shared earlier.
Sure. The Achievement Imperative Task Force meets monthly, and it's comprised of administrators, teachers. We have members of the community. We have a couple parents. We have a member of the clergy who was recently invited and joined us last meeting. And in the task force, we have several different subgroups. Christina is part of the task force, but she actually serves as kind of, much like she does with the district, somewhat of a research arm to help support each of the subcommittees. But our subcommittees this year are on the hiring of more diverse staff. We have subgroups on subcommittees on our Jumpstart programs, which we really are charged with trying to expand this year and have more opportunities for students to preview higher level courses where they can access and feel more comfortable getting into perhaps accessing an AP course. We have a subcommittee on restorative practices, which is looking at and training multiple staff throughout the district on restorative practices and looking at policies and alternatives to discipline to be recommended to more formally brought into our program. We have a subcommittee on the educational audit. And so that group is actually following a model that was shared by the Colorado Department of Education, recommended by the Delaware Valley Consortium on equity and excellence, and they recommended that audit as a process to go through to look at district practices and policies and procedures that may not be as accessible and equitable as we would hope. And so we're in the midst of that process. And I feel like I'm forgetting one subcommittee. We have an elementary. We have a couple of Jumpstart committees. One's elementary and one's a secondary. So to look at summer programs and expanding.
Excellent. And then we'll be getting into more detail on the curriculum committee on the task force as well as CARE.
That's the plan
is
for
it next month?
Next month, yes.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
The other thing that, I don't know if it came out of the committee, but the work that was done in elementary math acceleration, did that come out of the committee or did that just come out of the work that you guys were doing?
It combination. I mean, that subcommittee was working through the integrated math and also looking at different on-ramps, and so that was part of the
So that-
recommendation with.
The theme of the last several years has been, how can we increase the number of on-ramps? And
Absolutely.
one of the things that we've done is we've taken a look at the way we do acceleration. We've altered that. I think you'll hear more about that in the curriculum committee of the board. And we believe that will increase the number of minority students in the accelerated math program, but also provide on-ramp activities during the summer. If you didn't get identified at that special magical fourth grade, period, there's another way that you can, get back into that, and I'm really pleased with that, and looking forward
Thank
to
you.
sharing that.
Great. Are there other questions or comments?
Thanks, Dr. Epsilon. Just a couple of quick questions. One was, you talked about the participation rate, the opt-out rate in Lower Merion. How's that compared statewide? I mean, what's the statewide opt-out?
We are number one in the state.
Okay. What?
No one opts out more than us. We actually don't, I'm not aware of another district in the county that has an opt-out rate that's impacting their achievement.
Okay, well, that answers that question, I suppose. The other one was just in terms of the gaps. I noticed, looking at there's some significant gaps among the buildings between like Lower Merion and Howard with regard to like students with disabilities, a significant gap, and in both the biology and the algebra, and also in the elementary schools, they seem to vary. I was wondering how, I realize this is fairly new data, but what is the plan to sort of see what's going on in Howard that would cause a significant gap between the biology, for example, Keystone results, and that in Lower Merion? I mean, how are we looking at that or evaluating what's going on?
It's an important part of our data analysis process, because we get the big data and we have to continually make it more granular and look at it differently. As a point of information, when comparing the Keystone data across, you're looking at really small n numbers. So that doesn't justify, but the difference between 47% and 64% is a big number from looking at the biology number. If you look at our black students at both schools, that's a big number. Neither number where you want it to be. But when you're talking about an N of 24, it could be a couple students that can make a big difference. Again, not justifying it, but it can help explain why there's much more variation.
Thank you.
That was my question.
Okay.
Thanks. Just to get on to piggyback on that, is there a margin of error then that one can take into consideration when looking at these numbers? I mean, if the N is 24 versus an N of 263, you're saying 2 or 3 students. Is there a statistical margin of error given the number of the sample size?
In the case of these numbers that you're looking here on the screen, this is purely the percentage of students who achieved either proficient or advanced. So it's a pure reporting of results. So there really, a margin of error would not apply to these specific
So you couldn't
statistics.
extrapolate out that's where we, okay, I get what you're saying. Okay, skip that, okay. Text-dependent analysis. We've been talking about this now for a couple of years. And I'm not feeling like we're making the progress that we want to make. And so I'd like you to comment on that, but also you touched on it briefly, and I'm wondering if it's a bigger issue than we think. And that is the difference between the ability to analyze the material and the ability to write about their analyzing the material. And is it the writing issue that's keeping the scores down as opposed to the analyzing piece of it?
I think that's accurate, and that's why we're going to take the approach that we took with math, which is to bring in, I almost hate to use the word task force because that sometimes has a negative connotation, but that's what it is. Bring in a group of people and to put some serious time and effort into taking a look at that. That's what we did in math, and the end result was the integrated math program, which took a couple of years. I think that it is, we think it's an important skill. We have seen some movement in the elementary, if I'm correct. So we have seen some movement there. It's right now it's the secondary, and I'm not a believer in, well, just let's go fix something. It's really, let's go take a look at something and see is this a bigger issue, and what can we do about it. So I don't have an answer for you, but that's why we're bringing people together, much like we did with math.
Well, I know that when I was teaching, I was making my students write every single day. They had to write every single day. And it is incredibly time intensive for the teacher to respond to all that writing, but it makes an enormous difference in the students. And so I don't know if that's going to be one of the things that's looked at, whether maybe in some situations our class size might need some thought, or the way we break it up or something, because I think just anecdotally, the feedback that I hear from people is that their kids are not writing every day, and I think that is an important feature. My other question is really more a comment, and just if you want to respond to it. There is this discussion in the public that the achievement gap isn't really between African American students and white students. It's between economically disadvantaged students and non-economically disadvantaged students. And our data seems to suggest that it is, in fact, I took quick notes, but looking at the last couple Keystone exam things, ELA, the Black and African American students seem to be achieving lower than our economically disadvantaged, if I read that correctly. And the same thing in math, but not, or I don't know. But in most of them, our African American students are actually not performing as well as our economically disadvantaged students. And I think it behooves us to sort of dispel this myth that, oh, it's just, economically disadvantaged students who are struggling, and it's not really African American students who are. And I know Robin's questions had a lot to do with what we're doing to deal with that. But I mean, we've been pounding this issue also for the last 20 years, and I just feel like we're making incremental progress, but we're really, I don't know whether we're making significant progress. And I just,
So I think
comment.
I think that so you're referring to the Keystone data? Yeah. And again, I caution when you're dealing with N numbers that are that low, extrapolating too much from that. Having said that, I would tend to agree. I would tend to agree that there's this sense that economically disadvantaged and African American are bundled together, and therefore it's just a resource gap. No, and in fact, I'm aware of some studies that indicate that that's not the case. So I don't even have to wonder about that. I know that to be true. The Achievement Task Force is not just about African American kids either. The Achievement Task Force was about kids who were struggling because of a resource gap. We have a growing Hispanic population in the school district. And there are plenty of white kids who are also struggling with resource gaps. And so we have looked at all of those students together and said, how can we better address the needs of those kids? I think one of the important aspects of Christina's work in the academic support group evaluation is going to help us make some determinations about that. We also do believe that there are some resource gaps. One of the reasons why we started the one-to-one tutoring this year. And Brian, how many students do we have who are being tutored now?
Right now, approximately 106 students.
106 students are being tutored right now, but we really have need for how many?
Approximately 265.
So we still need more tutors to do the work, but that's one way of getting at both historically underperforming minority groups as well as kids who lack resources.
Can I just want to say also that I think that, since Mr. Copeland has been here, there's been an effort in the district for a long time to address achievement gaps and tried lots of different things. But I think that the kind of systemic organizational change that comes about with doing program evaluation and really, for kids across multiple types of learning gaps and opportunity gaps, has been quite extraordinary. And we're just starting to see, I think, that's the implementation of these different kinds of evaluations and then targeting what it is we need to do, as well as the achievement imperative task force. So I do want to say that.
Yeah, thank you, appreciate it. We, particularly with math, and Mr. Bonaventura, I know you've heard the expression math wars before. One of the things we didn't want to do is say, okay, let's swing the pendulum this way and let's swing the pendulum back the other way. Let's just be very strategic about the way we look at this, and that's why it's going to take, 3 years to phase in the integrated math so that it can be done with appropriate alacrity.
Oh, sorry, Debbie, go ahead.
Thank you. I just have a quick question. We have looked at our math program and we looked at our needs, and we've implemented, we're implementing the tutoring. We're changing our math program to, math 6, 7, 7, 8, 8, integrated, et cetera. With respect to our English language arts, are we going to look at how we are, one, at the tools we're using to teach and the how we're teaching? I know we're beginning to address the how with the text-dependent analyses and I have to go back in my notes, but with that, but are we also looking at the program that we're using? I mean, should we maybe be looking at using actual trade novels, things of more high interest to students?
One expected outcome from the task force is we look at things more systematically. The text-dependent analysis is a skill. We see a skill pattern that we recognize through our data. It says we need to do something about it. What we do about it, how we're approaching it, requires a much more complex look. And so one of the things that was great about the integrated math really took not one step back, like multiple steps back, big picture. We did a curriculum audit. We looked at approaches to how we're teaching it. We looked at what was taught when. And so that's what we intend to do with ELA, to look at, which hopefully will give us some answers about TDAs and other approaches that may or may not be being successful.
Are there any other questions or comments at this time? Okay, thank you again for the presentation. At this time, I'll ask if there's audience recognition on any issue, agenda or non-agenda items. If you can please come up to the front and sign in.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year to you.
Ruth Jenkin, and I'm from Wynwood. Question about the termination of the 4 properties. I came in a little bit late. Does that mean that you don't have playing fields? Did I misunderstand the process?
No, it doesn't, but why don't you ask your questions and then
Okay,
we'll answer.
all right.
Thank you.
A question is, are there practice tests for the Keystone? Do they get a chance to look at the exam and see what the format is and get comfortable with it? And if the tests are given for 2 weeks. Is it 2 weeks out of the year or 2 weeks out of the semester? And the 5th grade will eventually be in the middle school. Will they be counted as a middle school group, or will they be separated out as a 5th grade a class separate?
Thank you. Mr. Copeland?
Always depends on Ms. Jenkins to give good questions. Those were good questions. Appreciate it. I'll take the first two. In terms of the fields, because we have acquired properties 1835 County Line and adjacent to that 1800, I think, West Montgomery, we will not need those properties. We'll have sufficient property for the students. And the properties on 912 Spring Mill were considerably challenged because of wetlands. So the board's going to let that go. And in terms of practice tests, there are, well, I'll let you talk about the practice tests and how many and so forth and so on.
So there are item samplers that the state releases that are sample questions that teachers have used. However, we do not go through, dedicate time for dedicated quote-unquote test prep where kids are doing practice tests. We just haven't dedicated that time to. We've worked on skill development. Tests are given at the end of the year, not at the end of the semester, so the PSSA tests are given throughout over a 3-week span at the end of the year in grades 3 through 8. And when we transition 5th grade to the middle school, yes, that will be grouped as a middle school. It's based on who tests in the school.
Okay. Do you have anything else? Is there anything else you wanted to add?
Nope.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so our next Education Committee and regular board meeting is February 11th. There has to be another one. Am I missing one in here?
Well, the next education is,
Right.
the regular, I'm sorry.
I don't have it
Regular
listed.
business board meeting is on the 28th of January.
Thank you. I knew I was missing one, but I didn't have it here.
In this building.
Okay, that's okay. And then the other thing I just want to remind everyone is that on January 18th, Friday, there's the MLK Junior Afternoon of Service from 1 to 3 p.m. at Lower Merion High School in the cafeteria, and everyone's welcome. And with that, we are adjourned.
Oh, hold on one second. The next education meeting is the 11th. Did you say 14th?
No, the regular business board meeting is on January 28th.
Right.
And then the
And
next education committee meeting is February 11th.
February, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, I thought you said 14th.
Not on Valentine's Day. So, all right, it's all good. Okay, all right, thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.